Hi guys, welcome to PT22 Game 3. It's an advanced ordering game, but we're given a board. And generally when you're given a board, you want to use it, right? So I think this game is the perfect game to apply that strategy where rather than doing different rows to keep track of information, we'll just use subscript, right? So in this game, you get a choice for all these, whether they're oil or watercolor, and also whether they're 19th or 20th century. You can use a 1 and a 2 for that, or a 9 and a 2, doesn't really matter. So say we get a painting that is, say 2 is an oil and it's 20th century, we just make it look like that. This would be like a watercolor from the 19th century. No muss, no fuss, pretty easy way to do it. So the big thing about this game is that you got to keep track of these spatial relationships. So when you have an oil painting, for example, it's got to be next to, like this, or above another oil painting. Same with watercolor. And that's really the only thing that we have to keep track of. So say we have a watercolor here, and this is an oil, and this is an oil. This is going to have to be a watercolor. Same is true if this is an oil, and this was watercolor, this was watercolor. This would then have to be an oil. I don't think you really need to write these rules down because it's really the only thing going on in this game. It applies to the centuries as well. Say this is a 19th century, well then one of these is going to have to be a 19th century as well. Either the 4 or the 2. You can't have, say, 1, 1, and then 2, 2, 2, 2. This is violating a rule because it's not directly above or below another 20th century. This is violating a rule, these two, because they're not directly besides, above, or below another 19th century. Then we get a little specific information to keep track of. Painting 2 is a 19th century painting. Painting 3 is an oil. And then painting 5 is a 20th century painting. So now, can you make any big inferences from that? Well, not really like anything huge. You know that either 4 or 5 has to be a 2. So you could write 2 here, and then 2 arrows, giving a choice. At least one of these has to be 2. Both could be. And same here. At least one of these has to be a 19th century painting. And then at least one of these two has to be an oil. This and the 6 right here. And generally the work I'm doing in this game for the rest of the game is that I'm making little mini diagrams, so I'm going to make my inferences quickly. It turns out to not be the hardest game ever. 15 is actually one of the harder questions. We learned that all the 19th century ones are watercolor. So this right here is going to have to be a watercolor. This is a 20th century, so that does not trigger the rule. This is a rule that says 1, then it's going to be 1W. Right? It's a conditional rule. So we don't know about that one yet. This is an oil painting, so that could be either way. But what we can infer right away from this is, remember this rule right here, this inference right here, this is now a watercolor, so this is going to have to be an oil. And when I make that inference in an early question of game, I'm testing right then and there if that answers the question. And I look for stuff about painting number 6, and it says it's a 20th century painting. That's not quite exactly what I was looking for, but imagine it was a 19th century painting. Then this O would have to become a W, right? So that's not going to work. This does have to be a 20th century painting. Same with this one as well. So I looked for information related to 6, and I saw that that has to be the answer right there. 6 is a 20th century painting. 16 is pretty easy. We're figuring out what the only 2 watercolors could be, and what they're testing is that you remember that they have to be either beside, above, or directly below another watercolor. So 1 and 5, that's no good, because you can't, if both those are watercolor, they're not next to anything. So cross A out. How about 1 and 6? 1 and 6, same deal. 2 and 4, same thing. Cross that out. What about 4 and 5 as watercolor? Sure, that looks like it would work, and you can just then quickly eliminate E, 4 and 6. That's not going to work. They're not next to each other. So D's our right answer. For 17, we got to figure out what's going on if there's exactly 3 oils and 3 watercolors. The only thing we have to start working with here is this has to be an oil. So it's looking like there's only a few possible arrangements. You could have O, O, like that, right? Or you could have this right here, or you could have this right here. Unfortunately, though, that didn't look like there was anything in common between those different scenarios of how we could arrange the oils. But one thing I did notice is that, well, there's no way that this one can be an oil. Otherwise, it's not going to be connected to anything. No way to have this be oil and then have 3 and 3. So that corresponds to C as our correct answer choice. You try the other ones, you'll see that they all work conceivably with the ways that you can arrange the 3 oils. For question 18, we know that exactly 2 of the paintings are oils and 2 are 19th century paintings. So basically what's going to happen here is the O is, let me do this in a different color. The O is going to switch between these two, the other O, and then the 1 is going to switch between these two. The other 19th century is going to switch between these two places where it has to be. So then we just got to figure out something that must be false. And I'm going to look for something that directly violates these constraints. So painting 1 19th century and painting 6 in oil, I'm not going to look at doing a full order. It looks like it'll be possible. We make that one 19th century, this oil. It looks like it's going to be possible. I'm going to look for something that directly violates these 2 rules that I've written in here. Remember, one of these is a 1 and everything else has to be a 2. So, for example, this is a 2 and this is a watercolor. This is a watercolor. I'm looking for something that directly violates this. So painting 2 is 19th century and oil looks possible. That's one of the places the O can go. I'm going to keep looking. Painting 3 is 19th century, again, looks possible. Painting 1 and 2, both 19th century, yeah, again, looks possible. So I'm left with E. Painting 2 is oil, that looks okay. And painting 4 is 19th century. No, that directly violates that inference. There's no way you can have a 1 down there. If you did, these 2 would be separated, breaking the rule that same century paintings need to be adjacent to each other. Okay, 19's just asking us what could be true, and I think there's nothing better to do here than just try them all out. So painting 1 and 4 are 2 of exactly 3 20th century paintings. So I make this a 20th century, I make this a 20th century, and then we've now got our 3. That means the rest of these will be 1s. And that looks totally legit. We could just say make these oils, make this oil, make this watercolor, make this watercolor, make this watercolor. That could be true and everything works out fine. Go through the rest and you'll see there's problems with them. Really the harder thing about this game was knowing how to maybe do this technique with using the subscript to keep track of these extra categories rather than trying to set it up with like a row situation. Although that would work fine. You could have 2 little rows here above this and 2 little rows above this where you then, label your oil here and your, which century it is here. That would work fine too. Okay, so that's the game. See you on the next one.